Hello my friends and welcome back to the studio. David Kessler here. Today we're going to discuss my favorite watercolor paper. Now people say, why as an acrylic painter do you paint on watercolor paper? Well, I teach workshops all over the country. So it's really easy for me to take sheets of watercolor paper with me in my portfolio case that I ship all over the country, rather than lugging a bunch of canvases around or having to ship boxes of canvases. It saves me money, it saves me time, saves me weight when traveling. It's so much easier to paint on the paper than it is to canvas when I'm traveling. Now, they say, well, what do you do with the paper paintings? Do you have to frame them? Do you have to do this, mat them, glass, and all that? No, I don't use glass for anything. And I don't use mats for anything. There's two basic options. One, you can take it to your local framer, get him to adhere it to sort of a semi-rigid background and then put the frame right around it. Or what I usually do is just mount the paper painting to a cradled wood panel that's about an inch or 2 inches bigger around, so that it has the look of a frame without doing any framing, no glass, no mats, no nothing. So that's really the two options. At least the two that I use on a regular basis. Now, what I use for watercolor paper is Fabriano Artistico. It's manufactured by a company called Savoir-Faire. And I've used this paper since I was a watercolor painter, probably for the last 25 years. I've used Fabriano paper. It's absolutely amazing. Now, in full disclosure, Fabriano does provide me with paper to use for my workshops. In exchange, of course, for telling the students about it, which I'm glad to do because it's a wonderful product. I personally cover the surface with gesso. This is the raw surface, which is the traditional white paint. And this is the gesso side. There again, I've used the gesso on there so that it does two things for me. Number one, it seals the paper so that the acrylic paint doesn't seep into the paper. That gives me time to work the paint on the surface before it's absorbed into the paper. The second reason I do it is because this provides the same surface that I use on my canvases. Now the great thing about Fabriano paper is it's so tough. It's 100% cotton rag paper. It's very, very tough. So if you don't use a gesso surface on here, you can put the paint on there, scrub the paint off, use utensils on it to do all sorts of stuff to manipulate your paint around, and the paper will still retain its texture and shape and everything. It's amazing paper. Very flexible. I like it much, much better than any other watercolor paper that I've ever used. There's no animal products used for the sizing or anything on there. Right, it's all natural material. No animal byproducts are used in it, unlike some other watercolor papers. Okay, great stuff. I use 22 by 30 sheets, and then I'll tear those down to 22 by 28 or to 22 by 22 to do paintings. It's just great stuff. I mean, I've used it for so long, and I'm so familiar with it. With it as watercolor paper, using it, with not a gessoed surface, just with watercolor, or using it with a gesso surface. Either one is just great paper. It's comparable in cost to all other watercolor paper, and actually it's a lot cheaper depending on where you buy it than it is than other brands are to purchase. It's tough. It's long lasting. Never had any issue with it whatsoever. Never ever in 25 years, and I love it, and I couldn't imagine using another paper to paint on. You may, there again, paper surfaces are sort of like, brushes. There's a lot of personal preference in there. I think if you bought Fabriano Artistico paper, you would love it to paint on it. Certainly it takes up less space in your studio than canvas does. A lot less expensive surface to paint on than canvas. So the other great thing about it is, you can tear this or cut it into smaller sheets to do little studies on, and that's what we do in our workshop classes. And you haven't spent a whole lot for a surface to paint on it. You know, and if it ends up that it does turn out or whatever, you know, you can just throw it away. You can gesso over it or just throw it away. That's the great thing about using paper. It's so much less expensive than other types of substrates to use for painting, that you don't feel bad about, you know, having to throw something away if it doesn't turn out good. All right, so Fabriano Artistico paper. It's carried by, you know, Jerry's Artarama, Blick, and I'm sure some other retailers around the world. I've used it for 25 years, love it, and couldn't imagine using another paper to paint on. And I certainly would highly recommend that you buy some and try it to see if it works for your painting style. All right, if you want to know more about materials and how to use them, then please join me for a workshop, an abstract painting workshop somewhere hopefully near you, or at least in your region or a region of states around you. You can see a list of those workshops at davidmkessler.com, which is my website. You can contact the folks that are listed as contact persons for the one that you want to join up, and I hope to see you there. And I hope this video is helpful for you. And if you like the content of these videos, please subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.